The Hermit archetype holds the sacred keys to the second half of one's life. He is the soul's true north, illuminating the path inward to the highest self. The Hermit archetype, rooted in psychology, brimming with esoteric lore, overflowing with symbolism and imagery, and central to the Tarot Major Arcana, has long ignited a luminous flame in the collective psyche. More than a solitary figure, quietly perched atop a desolate mountain, this archetype reveals a monumental inward odyssey, a daring departure from the clamor of the external world toward the abiding silence of our innermost truths. Indeed, in an age defined by constant connectivity and mass overstimulation, the hermit stands as an ever-present guide, whispering that true wisdom is discovered in sacred solitude. You've likely encountered the hermit image in the 9th card of the Tarot's Major Arcana, or read about the archetypal recluse in mythic tales, or felt the faint stirring of such a figure in your own contemplative moments. But why does the hermit's lantern burn so insistently in times of chaos? And why does his presence surface powerfully within our collective unconscious the moment society feels astray? As Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who founded analytical psychology, suggested with his concept of individuation, we each hold a hidden potential for deeper self-realization. And sometimes this potential beckons us to step away, to roam the wilderness of our untamed psyche, to confront our illusions and unearth hidden gems. The hermit is not simply an image on a glossy tarot card. He is the very embodiment of a time-honored spiritual truth, withdrawing to experience illumination. When social norms begin to ring hollow, when personal crises demand deeper answers, or when the hustle of modern living devours every last shred of serenity, the hermit emerges like a quiet star at dusk, showing us the way to reawaken the lost art of listening to silence. Yet, there is a shadow side to this path. Alienation, isolation, or a misguided pride in feeling above the world. That is why it's crucial to understand the hermit in his full complexity, his capacity to both heal and harm. In this video, I'll be your companion as we journey through the hermit's ancient roots in biblical prophets and mythological exiles, traverse the symbolic imagery and esoteric contours of this tarot's cloaked wanderer, and delve into Jungian psychology to see why this archetype often arrives only after a brush with our own shadows. We'll examine cultural touchstones, like fictional characters who briefly don the hermit's cloak, and glimpse how solitude can become sacred or destructive, depending on our intentions and mindset. Ultimately, we'll witness how the hermit's lantern can light a universal path toward integration and wholeness in a world that so desperately needs a moment of authentic reflection. Here, solitude is not loneliness, it's luminous isolation, a clarifying hush in a deafening era. And the hermit does not simply walk away from society, he walks toward the interior landscapes of the soul, returning with hard-earned insights to share. In a deeper sense, he is our inner guide, the aspect of ourselves that yearns for something more true and vital than the next notification on our screen. We are not alone in our aloneness. The hermit, in countless forms, has walked with seekers across centuries, showing that the real pilgrimage lies within. And now, in our own time of dizzying change, we rediscover him, quietly illuminating that timeless path back to self and source. Let's begin. The roots of the hermit, solitude in myth, history, and tradition. Long before the hermit appeared as a tarot figure, the practice of stepping away from civilization to seek communion with the divine was woven into every spiritual tapestry on earth. From the dusty pages of biblical accounts to the remote corners of Eastern monastic traditions, those who craved a higher truth have always sought deserts, caves, mountains, lonely places stripped bare of distraction. While these figures vary wildly in tradition and form, they all momentarily reflect the deeper pattern we might call the hermit archetype, one of retreat, revelation, and return. Moses, for instance, met revelation on Mount Sinai, wrestling with the presence of the divine in a desolate, awe-inspiring wilderness. Christ endured 40 days in the desert, grappling with temptation until spiritual clarity blazed forth. The Desert Fathers in early Christian history left the clamor of Roman life to dwell in barren landscapes, forging an interior path few had the courage to tread. Yet even beyond the familiar Judeo-Christian narratives, mythic echoes abound. Consider Diogenes the Cynic, a wild-eyed philosopher who roamed with a lantern in broad daylight, declaring that he was searching for an honest man. With biting irony and stark defiance, he stripped life down to its bare essentials, exposing the falseness of social pretense. Though his madness was theatrical and his wisdom abrasive, the image he left behind, that of the solitary seeker with a lantern, lingers like a riddle from the hermit himself. Odin, from Norse myth, undertook solitary ordeals in pursuit of secret wisdom, sacrificing comfort and familiarity for gnosis. Saturn, or Kronos, overthrown and cast down, retreats into the shadows of myth as a brooding figure of exile and introspection. Later traditions draped him in a cloak of philosophical depth, Time's austere teacher whose stillness demands reflection and reckoning. In this light, Saturn becomes a cosmic hermit, moving not through space, but through the inward corridors of memory and consequence. And bridging east and west, we have the Hindu concept of vanaprastha, retiring to the forest in the later stages of life, and the Buddhist forest monk tradition, where peaceful isolation fosters transcendent insight into the nature of reality. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "When I am among the many, I live as the many do, and I do not think as I really think. After a time, it always seems as though they want to banish me from myself and rob me of my soul, and I grow angry with everybody and fear everybody. I then require the desert so as to grow good again." These words echo the hermit's timeless call. Sometimes we must remove ourselves from the communal swirl to remember who we are without society's unrelenting scripts. The wilderness becomes a crucible where illusions are burnt away and only what is genuine can endure. On a grander plane, every culture has revered its solitary mystics, those who dwell at the edges, untamed by institutional doctrine, as guardians of truths too subtle or dangerous for the mainstream. From Christian anchorites to Sufi dervishes dancing on the edge of ecstasy, we see the recurring imprint of the hermit archetype in what we might call the outsider mystic, a liminal soul whose wisdom is forged in exile and silence. Symbolically, the caves, forests, and mountains to which these hermits journey are external mirrors of an inward plunge. The cave is an echo chamber for the soul, the forest a labyrinth of raw potential, the mountain the apex of silent knowing. To venture there is to strip away the habitual sense of identity, revealing the deeper self behind the masks we wear. Beneath society's watchful eyes, we can never fully shed these masks. But in solitude, illusions become painfully or beautifully transparent, forcing us into confrontation with the bare essence of our being. We call these men and women hermits, yet the name conceals a paradox. They are not running away from life, but diving into its heart. They choose the path of luminous isolation over the collective's mesmerizing distractions. Far from being loners sealed in bleak isolation, hermits across history have cultivated a deeper communion with nature, with the divine, and with the hidden recesses of their psyche. In a frantic world, they stand as living testaments to the idea that one might find clarity, not by intensifying outer activity, but by daring to inhabit the stillness within. Ultimately, behind every famed solitary figure, Moses in the desert, Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, Diogenes with his lantern, there is a universal thread. The hermit's vow to step beyond society's illusions and guard the shards of truth that civilization forgets. Let us see how this vow became visually codified in the tarot, where the hermit's presence blends a myriad of ancient symbols into a single, haunting image of wisdom guiding us through darkness. The Tarot Hermit, symbolism, imagery, and the light of inner illumination. Step into the world of the tarot, and you soon encounter the ninth trump of the major arcana, the Hermit. Cloaked in gray, holding aloft a lantern lit by a six-pointed star, this figure stands on a snow-capped summit. At first glance, it looks like a solitary traveler pausing on a cold, windswept peak. But esoteric currents swirl here, carrying us far beyond any simple reading of an old man in winter. The cloaked figure, more than meets the eye. In the widely recognized Rider-Waite-Smith tarot depiction, the hermit's gray robes denote neutrality, a liminal state bridging ignorance, black, and purity, white. Psychologically, gray can suggest an egoless space. No flamboyant colors announce the personality. This is an individual who has stepped outside the usual definitions of status, wanting no worldly finery to speak for him. His cloak is a kind of veil of the inner world, an outward expression of invisible metamorphosis. By wrapping himself in this nondescript garment, he disappears from mundane view, becoming a ghostly presence in the everyday world. Within his cloak, the old identity dissolves, making room for the new. The lantern and the six-pointed star. Cradled in the hermit's right hand is a lantern. Inside glows a six-pointed star, often interpreted as the Seal of Solomon, or the Star of David, or the hexagram in many occult traditions. This star captures the union of opposites, the upward triangle of spirit and the downward triangle of matter. It epitomizes, as above, so below, that abiding Hermetic principle. On a spiritual level, the star's glow reminds us that in the darkest night of the psyche, a hidden luminescence awaits. The lantern itself speaks to illumination from within. For the hermit, knowledge is not gleaned from external dogmas, but discovered in solitude and introspection. Mystical threads in the Hermetic Qabalah link this card to the Hebrew letter Yod, representing a divine spark or hand. The hermit's path is said to run from Chesed, mercy, to Tifereth, beauty, on the tree of life, a journey from benevolence to the radiant core of the self. Holding the lantern in his right or active hand indicates a conscious choice to bring this inner light forward, not hoard it in the secret recesses of the mind. Carl Jung famously wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. Not only dark, but also light, not only bestial, semi-human and demonic, but superhuman, spiritual, and, in the classical sense of the word, divine." This quote reverberates with the hermit's lantern symbolism, the divine star shining from within the gloom of the unconscious. The staff in the left hand. Supporting his silent trek is a staff often held in the hermit's left or receptive hand. Symbolically, a staff can denote authority, a vestige of the biblical rod guiding the flock, or the magician's wand channeling energies. Esoterically, it's a kind of pillar of inner power, an axis that aligns the hermit's body with the cosmic energies at large. Some see the staff as a representation of the spinal column, reminiscent of Kundalini in Eastern traditions, or the middle pillar in Kabbalah. Held in the left hand, it expresses a balanced synergy. The hermit's approach is not an aggressive stance, but a receptive communion with higher forces. If the lantern is the outward revelation of truth, the staff is the inward grounding that ensures the hermit remains steady on his spiritual path. Mountaintop and snow. Peering closer, we notice the snowy peak, a peak of silent knowing. Mountains appear throughout mythology as the axis mundi. Mount Sinai in the Hebrew tradition, Mount Olympus in Greece, Mount Meru in Hindu cosmology. They serve as natural altars bridging heaven and earth. The hermit is perched here, representing a vantage point above the noise and illusions below. If the forest or cave is a place of womb-like introspection, the mountaintop is the quiet plain of revelation, where one can see the bigger picture. The snow evokes purity and the sense of a spiritual frontier too cold for trivialities. This desert of the soul is as merciless as it is transformational, like the austere training grounds of ancient mystics. Numerology of the Hermit. The Hermit's number is 9. A digit that signals completion of a cycle. It stands on the cusp of 10, a new beginning. 9 months of human gestation mirror the card's significance. The Hermit fosters the soul's gestation in solitude, preparing it for the next birth. In the tarot, 9 is often linked to initiation, to the final test before stepping into a new realm of consciousness. Solitude and the descent within. Behind the physical imagery lies a deeper invitation. The Hermit's posture is stooped, as though gazing into the hidden corners of his inner world. He is not an evangelist waving his lantern at you. Instead, he paces forward as if inviting you to follow at your own risk. Solitude is not a punishment, but an initiation, and the Hermit's humility is the price of admission to these hidden realms. He must bow his ego to the greater mystery. In that sense, the Hermit's downward gaze suggests the soul's willingness to glimpse its own darkness, and therein find the glowing star. Virgo and Mercury. Astrological keys. Astrologically, the Hermit is tied to Virgo, an earth sign ruled by Mercury. Virgo's core qualities, analysis, refinement, discernment, are here exalted in the service of spiritual and sacred purification of the self. Embodying Virgo's highest vibration, the Hermit becomes the sacred analyst who distills spiritual truth, methodically discerning illusion from genuine illumination. The Hermit is that part of us meticulously sorting genuine illumination from illusions. Alchemical undertones. At the same time, we sense Saturnine echoes, melancholy, isolation, the heavy seriousness of solitary endeavor, intertwining with Mercury's nimble, mind-centered revelations. The Hermit stands on that boundary, bridging introspective dryness and the bright spark of insight. In alchemy, the Hermit's path can correspond to the Nigredo stage, where the ego dissolves into primal blackness before re-emerging as spiritual gold. Saturn, often associated with lead, indicates the slow, sometimes painful purification. The six-pointed star in the lantern foreshadows the eventual union of opposites. The Hermit, in effect, wields the lamp that kindles hope within darkness, reminding us that even the bleakest nights can serve as wombs of transformation. The paradox of light and darkness. Crucial to the Hermit's meaning is the paradox. He is alone in darkness, yet he holds a guiding light. This duality matches the alchemical motto, lux in tenebris, light in darkness. And as he is simultaneously overshadowed and illuminated, so is the human psyche, partly known, partly unknown, always dancing between denial and epiphany. Solitude becomes the crucible where we strip away illusions, discovering truths about ourselves we never suspected. Solitude as initiation. The Hermit's greatest secret might be that isolation is not an end, but a means, a rite of passage. True solitude evokes deeper presence to the sacred or the self. The images of monastics, yogis, druids, or shamans retreating from the collective swirl ring with the same chord. One must die to the world's superficial chatter to awaken the deeper faculties within. This card, then, is an invitation to a vow of authenticity that can only be forged in silence. The Hermit's lantern as a shared light. Once we find the Hermit's light, do we keep it locked away? He gently shows that genuine inner illumination begs to be brought back to the world. Even though he stands alone, the path behind him remains lit for others who follow. This is not the dominion of dogma or evangelism, but the gentle empowerment to find your own guiding star. By turning within, we often discover a universal gold that can help heal the outer realm. That is the subtle generosity of the hermit's presence. He never proclaims, "Follow me," yet his very posture invites it. Indeed, this ninth trump is not an idle representation of a grandfatherly recluse. It is a vivid tapestry of mystical hints. A quiet man on a frozen peak. But if you look closer, you see the entire journey from despair to insight captured in symbolic form. To walk with the hermit is to learn that meaning does not come from external authorities. It emerges from the brave confrontation with one's own darkness, guided by an inner spark we all carry but rarely notice. That is the gift of the Hermit card, unveiling a path of reflection that ultimately leads us into a more profound engagement with life and a willingness to share that glimmer of truth with those who wander after us. The Whisper Within, Jungian Psychology and the Path of Integration. In the architecture of Jungian thought, the hermit stands as an embodiment of late-stage individuation, the call that arises once we have slogged through the tides of the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious, and confronted our own shadow. Before the hermit's lantern can guide us, we must first wrestle with the aspects of ourselves we prefer to keep buried. Jung believed the path to wholeness demands a moral effort to become conscious of the darker aspects of one's being. Jung writes, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge. The hermit, in this sense, emerges after we've stood toe-to-toe with the shadow, refused to banish it, and begun weaving it into a more honest self-image. Far from the naive dreamer or the flamboyant puer aeternus, the hermit is a soul tempered by trials. His posture suggests both humility and authority, an authority earned by navigating the labyrinth of the unconscious, not inherited from social hierarchies or public applause. This quietly resonates with Jung's personal experiences, especially his dialogues with Philemon, a wise inner figure who appeared to Jung in visions and dreams. To Jung, Philemon was part teacher, part psychopomp, a guide bridging the conscious mind and the deeper reaches of psyche. Though Philemon is most often associated with the wise old man archetype, his symbolic presence also carried hermit-like qualities: solitary, inwardly focused, and deeply transformative. In this sense, he resembled the hermit archetype, a luminous figure who challenged Jung to question the illusions of the rational ego. This is the archetypal function the hermit takes on in each of us, a wise whisper that arises in dreams or inner dialogues, beckoning us to undertake the lonely climb toward authenticity. The hermit stands in stark contrast to the puer aeternus, eternal youth, rootless, impulsive, enthralled by novelty. Where the puer flees from seriousness, the hermit is prepared to endure its solitude. He does not preach inflated cosmic truths. He listens, observes, descends into the brambles of the unconscious to retrieve lost parts of the psyche. Jung wrote another famous line: "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." We see how this ties seamlessly to the hermit's practice, shining the lantern on our hidden recesses, revealing illusions that keep us half asleep. Like a skillful mentor, the hermit never forces or coerces. Rather, he holds space for the ego to see itself plainly. Though not identical to the wise old man, the hermit may be seen as a forerunner, a mode of inner seeking that opens the door to deeper wisdom. In some journeys, the hermit is not yet the wise old man, but the figure of the wise old man hides within him, and, in this sense, the hermit becomes a threshold figure whose long solitude ripens into the fuller insight personified by the wise old man archetype. But it's crucial to note that the hermit is not always an outer guru. More often, it is the still, small voice within, quiet but persistent, urging us to integrate our wounds, fears, and yearnings into the total fabric of the self. Individuation requires exactly this level of introspection. Once the ego quiets, the deeper realms speak, and in that hush, we discover the hermit's real gift. Not knowledge of every cosmic secret, but the capacity to hear our own truth in a world overrun by conflicting opinions. The hermit doesn't solve life for us. He teaches us how to listen so deeply that solutions unfold from the deepest strata of our being. In the end, the hermit archetype reveals that solitude isn't an escape, but a return to the wellspring of meaning. Embodying the hermit calls us to cultivate an inner listening so profound that the unconscious eventually becomes a shining ally, bridging darkness and light within our hearts. That is individuation in action, a journey from fragmentation to subtle wholeness, guided by a lantern lit by our own reclaimed spirit. Mystical solitude, the alchemy of inner silence. A gust of wind stirs the hush around you, and suddenly you realize how loud true silence can feel. This is the hermit's terrain, a vast, echoing quiet that leaves no place for your psychic clutter to hide. In that stillness, illusions and persona attachments burn away, revealing the raw contours of who you are beneath social conditioning. It's a fierce alchemy, not for the faint of heart. Jung once put it beautifully: whoever looks into the mirror of the water will see first of all his own face. Whoever goes to himself risks a confrontation with himself. The mirror does not flatter, it faithfully shows whatever looks into it, namely, the face we never show to the world because we cover it with the persona, the mask of the actor. But the mirror lies behind the mask and shows the true face. In solitude, the water becomes still and we meet our real face, unmasked by the usual roles we perform. Great luminaries, from Nietzsche meditating in the Alps to Laozi leaning over a mountain precipice, knew that alone in the wilderness, a kind of primal clarity arises. It's the reason the Desert Fathers entered the scorching emptiness, and why so many spiritual lineages uphold the practice of retreat. Here, in the desert of the soul, a new wellspring can erupt from dryness, a living water that nourishes the deeper self. Yet sacred solitude differs markedly from loneliness. Loneliness starves the heart, solitude feeds it. We might say one flees from the world in bitterness, while the other steps away in reverence. Where loneliness is a howling hollowness, the hermit's solitude crackles with potential. It becomes a container for transformation, like the alchemical furnace that slowly reduces base metals, only to resurrect them as purer forms. Of course, in modern culture, this is a radical stance. We're bombarded by social media feeds, dopamine hits, endless errands. We hardly know how to be still. We fear the dead air, the inert phone. We fear the wide open space in which we might have to face the directionless swirl of our own unsettled mind. But consider, the hermit's lamp cannot glow if we drown in the neon noise of perpetual stimulation. Silence is the threshold across which the hermit walks. Indeed, part of the reason we recoil from silence is that it reveals the unconscious illusions, the hidden desires, and the repressed sorrows we stuff in the corners of our psychic house. That's the same reason it's so transformative. Sacred seclusion, as monastics often call it, invites those suppressed elements to come forth into the healing light of awareness. The question is whether we'll accept that invitation or run from it. On a collective scale, the hermit's example challenges a world that reflexively pathologizes stepping away. In a hyper-connected era, being offline is considered suspect if not outright deviant. Yet, ironically, those who do manage to slip away for a time often return as healers, artists, or contemplatives, brimming with a renewed sense of wonder. They come back with a vision unclouded by the stale assumptions that saturate daily life. They bring perspective, like a mountaintop vantage that can see patterns invisible at ground level. No wonder society historically labels the hermit as an outsider. He or she wields a dangerous freedom, the ability to see beyond the matrix of collective illusions. And that very perspective can be a gift in times of crisis. Solitude births oracles, prophets, and truth-tellers. If the world is swirling in madness, the hermit's quiet vantage might be the only place from which we can chart a path back to harmony. Silence, ironically, becomes the clarion call of a deeper wisdom, forging an alchemy that can melt the lead of our conditioned identity into the gold of abiding authenticity. The hermit's shadow, when isolation becomes a cage. Be warned, not all who wander in solitude are illumined. Just as every archetype carries a shadow side, the hermit can become twisted when fear, bitterness, or pride drive the withdrawal. If the hermit's gift is luminous isolation, his curse is stifling separation, an ivory tower cut off from compassion or genuine engagement. We see it in those who retreat from society purely to avoid the messy realities of human life. They hide in books, philosophies, or spiritual illusions, never bridging the gap between insight and empathy. Ivory Tower Syndrome captures this, a safe but suffocating vantage where one glances down on the world from a haughty distance. Rather than re-emerging with the wisdom gleaned in solitude, this shadow hermit curls inward, hoarding knowledge like a miser and letting cynicism curdle the heart. Carl Jung reminds us that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If the hermit refuses to acknowledge his own arrogance or emotional wounds, that darkness accumulates behind the closed door of solitude. It can manifest as spiritual superiority, declaring, "I have retreated, thus I am more evolved than you." This posture is a trap because it fosters illusions of grandeur rather than deeper connectedness. Just as dangerous is the drift into numb detachment. "I have studied everything and nothing matters," a nihilistic hush that sours into inactivity. Jung also penned, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong." Indeed, left to fester, isolation can cause the hermit to slip from sense into nonsense, from a quest for meaning into a swirling labyrinth of overanalysis. Rather than forging an anchor of clarity, the shadow hermit spirals into paralyzing indecision, knowing so much that it becomes impossible to act. The burden of secret wisdom might become too great for a solitary soul to bear, choking out spontaneity and simple human warmth. At its worst, this shadow transforms solitude into an almost prison-like environment, where the hermit fixates on subtle esoteric truths while ordinary life withers. Spiritual superiority, a potent mask for unhealed wounds, morphs into contempt for the uninitiated. If the hermit never re-enters the bustling world, bearing his light gently among others, then his entire sojourn is for naught. The point of deeper insight, ironically, is to serve as a beacon in the communal darkness, not to gloat from behind closed doors. We must remember, the hermit's separation is meant to be temporary, a rotation in and out, like the rhythmic breath of day and night. If he disappears into the cave and never emerges, he loses precisely what he sought to find. Alienation is not illumination. In short, the hermit's shadow is a cautionary tale. Isolation can become a defensive fortress that bars real growth, or it can become a quiet throne of spiritual ego. The difference rests on whether the retreat is fueled by an authentic call to integrative solitude, or a flight from life's complexities. The line is thin. That's why conscious self-reflection and an eventual return from the mountain are crucial. Solitude may be the womb of epiphanies, but sharing those epiphanies reaffirms our place in the grand tapestry of human connection. The hermit in culture, archetypes in dreams and fiction. Like the silent old man or cloaked guide who appears in a dream at night, the hermit wanders through our collective imagination in countless guises. Sometimes he is the solitary wizard at the edge of a forgotten realm. Other times, the quiet mentor who vanishes as soon as the hero is ready to walk alone. He rarely fights with sword and shield. Instead, he speaks in riddles, sets unseen wheels in motion, and disappears when the real initiation begins. Throughout myth and fiction, many characters briefly wear the hermit's cloak, and in their fleeting solitude, they access insights unattainable in the throngs of daily life. We can look at three classic figures often cited. Though they may not remain hermits forever, their pattern of withdrawal, reflection, and return exemplifies the essence of sacred solitude. Gandalf the Grey in The Lord of the Rings. Before he becomes Gandalf the White, he vanishes into the darkness of Moria, wrestling with the Balrog in a moment that nearly costs him his life. While Gandalf is not a constant recluse, he steps into that hermit space whenever he departs the Fellowship. His transformation upon returning is reminiscent of a descent and return cycle, echoing the hermit's quiet metamorphosis at the mountain's summit. Merlin in Arthurian lore, often portrayed as a mystic who drifts between forest solitude and kingly court, Merlin stands at the edge of the known world, half in Camelot, half in the enchanted unknown. He doesn't wield political power, but he shapes destiny through vision, prophecy, and insight drawn from realms beyond ordinary perception. That's hermit energy, mythical, liminal, and elusive. Zarathustra as portrayed by Nietzsche, the figure who descends from a decade of silent reflection in the mountains. His solitude births a radical worldview, one forged not in debate or public discourse, but in the crucible of isolation. His solitary vantage gave rise to a bold new philosophy that shakes the pillars of the status quo. Zarathustra is a kind of the hermit in full bloom, someone who emerges from the heights with revelations, though not necessarily to be worshipped as a guru. These cultural archetypes remind us that the hermit is frequently a guide or psychopomp, leading the hero and us through transitional phases. Sometimes this guidance is ephemeral, vanishing once it has triggered the needed transformation. The role is not to remain, but to serve as a catalytic presence. We see this pattern in dreams too. An old man or woman emerges, offers cryptic counsel, and dissolves when we wake. These dream visitors reflect our psyche's deep capacity to guide itself when rational planning fails. Why does culture keep resurrecting this archetype in fiction, especially in times of collective upheaval? Possibly because the hermit represents an unbroken lineage of sacred quiet, a last refuge of insight in eras that have lost touch with spiritual dimension. Our myths and stories yearn for the genuine elder, one who doesn't thirst for power but for truth. And so we conjure him in fairy tales, epics, and modern allegories, hoping that by remembering this archetype, we can rekindle it within ourselves. In a dream, the hermit's arrival may herald a personal rite of passage or a moment to step away from the swirling social dance. Our shared hunger for mentors and wise elders in entertainment, meanwhile, hints at a cultural emptiness. We lack communal rites that truly initiate us into deeper life mysteries. The hermit in fiction, or dreams, signals that we crave the ancient role of the guide who stands apart from the world, discerning the deeper currents of meaning. He might vanish after his teaching, but that vanishing itself is the hallmark of someone who does not cling, someone who sought not applause but the good of the soul. The return from the mountain, wisdom brought back to the world. Eventually, the hermit must descend from the mountain. True, some legendary hermits remain perched in the wilderness until their final breaths, but the archetypal cycle includes a return. What's gathered in solitude must be shared, or else it withers in isolation. This is the crowning irony of the hermit's quest. It looks like an escape, but it is often the first step toward genuine service. After Moses communed with divinity atop Mount Sinai, he returned bearing the tablets that would guide an entire people. The Desert Fathers, though many lingered in desert cells, became spiritual hubs, their counsel sought by travelers from distant lands. Even in more modern contexts, an individual who has braved the hush of genuine introspection will usually bear gifts upon re-entry. New insights into relationships, fresh perspectives on life's tangled knots, a deepened capacity for empathy and presence. This is not a hero's parade replete with trumpet fanfare. The hermit returns quietly, typically unannounced, but radiating an unmistakable calm that can shift the atmosphere. He or she no longer needs to prove anything. Perhaps that's the real hallmark of the integrated hermit. No swagger, no hunger for approval, no sermonizing. Instead, a gentle readiness to share what has been learned if the moment calls for it. In many traditions, this is the posture of the conscious elder, the wise presence in the tribe or community who doesn't wave a banner but welcomes seekers with open ears and unwavering gaze. In times starved of meaning, such a figure can quietly restore a sense of groundedness. They may not have all the answers, but they do bring clarity, calm, and the conviction that life is more than superficial success or fleeting pleasure. They carry the hush of the mountaintop within them, and that hush can be the missing link in a chaotic environment. The hermit's return also represents the cyclical nature of spiritual practice. One does not retreat once and remain forever. It's more like a dance, stepping inward for solitude, then outward to share and serve, then inward again when the clamor becomes overwhelming. Over time, this cycle cultivates an ongoing equilibrium. Solitude and engagement flow in unison. In Kabbalistic terms, the path from Chesed to Tifereth is not traversed only once. Each day, we find ourselves refining mercy into beauty, gleaning from inner stillness so we can better shine in the world. When you strip away the drama of the external quest, the hermit's real gift is presence. He or she has spent enough time alone to face their own shadows, illusions, heartbreaks. That raw confrontation fosters a stable, unflappable compassion for others. This is what the world so desperately needs. Not more cleverness, but more awakened hearts shaped by reflective solitude. And ironically, that's precisely what the hermit's lamp can offer if he decides to come down from the mountain. No grand instructions, just a living example that you can be whole, human, and quietly luminous amidst the everyday chaos. Thus, the hermit's cycle ends where it began, in the world, but now with the treasure of deeper self-knowledge, humility, and compassion in hand. The summit is not a final destination. It's a pivot point where illusions fall away and clarity dawns. The real test is whether we can bring that clarity back to the valley, where life in all its complexities unfolds, and spark a subtle transformation in the hearts of those still in the bustle. The hermit stands as more than a tarot image or a dusty archetype from forgotten lore. He is a living presence in the human journey, beckoning us toward a stage of spiritual adulthood. Having wrestled with illusions and integrated the shadow, he no longer craves external validation. Instead, he lights a lantern that helps us see our own path in the dark. Solitude, once dreaded, becomes the door to inner revelation. Carl Jung writes, "My friends, it is wise to nourish the soul, otherwise you will breed dragons and devils in your heart." These words hint that silence and self-reflection aren't luxuries. They are necessities in a world that can devour our spirit with noise. When the hermit's quiet lamp appears, it signals a turning point. We can pause, step out of the frantic race, and listen to the call that arises from within. We discover that, in letting go of the need to be seen or praised, we finally learn to see ourselves and, by extension, the world more clearly. The hermit is not lonely because he is whole. In that state of wholeness, the boundaries between inner and outer soften. His light is our own, shining through the shadows of confusion. Yes, Modern life brims with challenges: burnout, overstimulation, the pressures of technological overload. But the hermit's timeless message is that the remedy lies in sacred retreat, the inward pilgrimage that reorients us toward deeper truths. When the tumult of everyday living crescendos into chaos, consider heeding the hermit's whisper: withdraw, listen, remember, and then re-emerge. In that vow to step into luminous isolation and come back bearing authenticity, we join an ancient lineage of truth seekers. And in so doing, we keep the hermit's lamp alive for generations yet to wander in the twilight. Thanks for watching. How has the hermit archetype shaped your own path? Comment below. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and consider joining my YouTube channel memberships to support my work and gain exclusive perks. The link is in the description below. And finally, tap the on-screen video to explore the psychology and symbolism of the High Priestess archetype next.